For 30 years, Johnny Carson ruled late night without ever losing his cool on camera. But I discovered 16 shocking moments when America's most beloved host nearly broke character completely. These weren't just awkward interviews, these were career-defining disasters that changed television forever. The wildest part? NBC executives tried to bury footage of number 7 for decades. The monkey bathroom disaster. Johnny Carson loved animal segments, but one primate guest in 1969 created the most humiliating moment of his career. Animal handler Joan Embry brought a supposedly well-behaved marmoset onto the show. The tiny creature seemed docile until Embry placed it on Carson's shoulder. Without warning, the marmoset scaled Johnny's perfectly coiffed hair, his pride and joy, and proceeded to relieve itself directly on his head. The warm liquid dripped down Carson's neck as the audience howled with laughter. Johnny, ever the professional, quipped, "I've had people rain on my parade before, but never on my head." Backstage, Carson was absolutely furious. He immediately showered and had his hair professionally restyled before returning for the next segment. The crew watched in silence as he stormed through the studio, muttering about dignity and professional standards. What made this moment particularly excruciating for Carson wasn't just the public humiliation. It was that it undermined the dignified, in-control persona he'd spent years perfecting. After this incident, Carson implemented strict rules about animal handling on set. The marmoset was quietly banned from future television appearances, and Embry was given a stern warning about bringing unpredictable animals near Johnny's hair. Tonight Show producer Peter Lastly later revealed, Johnny's hair was sacred territory. You could joke about his divorces, but never touch the hair. That monkey crossed the one line no guest ever should. The Robin Williams Hurricane. Robin Williams' 1991 appearance wasn't just funny. It was a comedy tornado that left Carson completely unable to control his own show. Williams arrived to promote Awakenings, but immediately launched into a manic impression of Shakespeare wandering Stratford-upon-Avon shouting, "To be or not to be, you know." When Carson tried steering the conversation toward his film, Williams erupted into a series of lightning-fast impressions. Sylvester Stallone as Hamlet, "I'm back. Watch out, Denmark." Jack Nicholson discussing Shakespearean philosophy, "Neither a borrower nor a lender be, and the t-shirts keep for thyself." And even George Bush writing to Saddam Hussein, "Dear oil sucker." What made this appearance legendary was Carson's visible surrender. He completely abandoned his planned questions, tossed his note cards aside, and simply became an audience member on his own show. The camera caught Johnny wiping away tears of laughter, gasping, "Robin, Robin," as Williams continued his unstoppable comedic assault. Backstage crew reported that Carson was physically exhausted after the segment, telling his producer, "I need a vacation after just 10 minutes with that man. He's not human, he's a comedy weapon." While most hosts would have resented being so thoroughly upstaged, Carson later told his writing staff, "Some nights you're the straight man, some nights you're the comedian. With Robin, you're always the straight man, and that's perfectly fine." Williams returned multiple times, with Carson always knowing the only preparation possible was no preparation at all. The Frank Sinatra takeover. Frank Sinatra's 1976 appearance proved that even Johnny Carson could be intimidated by a guest. From the moment Old Blue Eyes strolled onto the stage, the power dynamics shifted completely. Sinatra didn't wait for questions. He immediately took control, dictating which topics they'd discuss and interrupting Carson repeatedly. At one point, Sinatra actually started interviewing Carson, turning the tables in a way no other guest had dared. "So Johnny, how's the divorce treating you?" he asked, touching on Carson's notoriously private personal life. Johnny's smile tightened as he mumbled a brief response before attempting to regain control. What made the situation particularly uncomfortable was Sinatra's untouchable status in the entertainment world. Carson couldn't assert his authority without risking significant backlash. Viewers familiar with Johnny's subtle cues could see his growing irritation in his whitening knuckles and forced laughter. The backstage crew stood frozen, watching their boss, the most powerful man in television, being dominated on his own show. During a commercial break, Carson whispered to his producer, "Get me out of this gracefully." When they returned from the break, Sinatra was suddenly more cooperative, suggesting someone had intervened. Carson biographer Lawrence Leamer notes in King of the Night that this interview represented one of the rare instances of Carson being truly intimidated by a guest, something that bothered him immensely when he reviewed the show later. According to NBC executive Dick Ebersol, Carson later complained, "I felt like I was a guest on my own damn show." The Elephant Disaster Zone. In 1977, Carson welcomed an animal trainer who brought a baby elephant onto the set. The audience cooed as the adorable pachyderm trotted out, not realizing they were about to witness the most disgusting moment in Tonight Show history. When the studio lights brightened, the elephant became visibly nervous. Carson approached carefully, microphone in hand, just as the animal's digestive system decided to express its stage fright. A tsunami of elephant waste cascaded onto the pristine studio floor with such force that the front row audience members physically recoiled. The smell immediately permeated Studio 6B as Carson backpedaled, covering his nose with his tie. "Looks like Ed ordered takeout again," he quipped, desperately trying to salvage the moment. The audience howled as stagehands scrambled ineffectively with tiny towels against the biblical deluge. What made this moment particularly challenging was that it dragged on for what felt like eternity. The commercial break couldn't come fast enough, but even then, the cleanup was impossible to complete. When they returned on air, Carson had relocated his desk several feet upstage, but the stench lingered. Doc Severinsen, the bandleader, later recalled, "The band couldn't play. We were laughing too hard." But Johnny was furious. His shoes were ruined, and he kept muttering about dignified television between takes. This incident led to the Carson Protocol: plastic sheeting for all future large animal segments, doubled hazard pay for janitors, and a 2-year moratorium on elephant acts. When Carson announced the elephant's return years later, the studio audience gave a standing ovation, not for the animal, but for the brave cleaning crew. The Bob Hope frustration. Bob Hope appeared on The Tonight Show more than any other celebrity, but what viewers never realized was that Carson secretly dreaded these appearances. By the 1970s and 80s, Hope's Tonight Show visits had become painfully predictable and rigidly scripted. Hope would walk on, deliver pre-written jokes regardless of Carson's questions, promote his latest NBC special with a clip, and exit, all without any genuine interaction. For Carson, a master of spontaneous wit, these robotic appearances were the antithesis of good television. Behind the scenes, when producers informed Carson that Hope wanted to come on the show again, Johnny would visibly deflate, asking, "Again?" But he never felt he could refuse NBC's biggest star. During one particularly awkward 1978 appearance, Hope managed to plug 3 different sponsors within 7 minutes, transforming Carson's show into what Johnny later called an infomercial with canned laughter. What made these appearances particularly uncomfortable was Hope's declining abilities in his later years. As his eyesight and hearing failed, Hope would often answer questions out of order or miss Carson's cues entirely. According to Tonight Show producer Peter Lasley, after one painful segment, Carson commented that he hoped someone would shoot him if he ever ended up like that. The final straw came when Hope's team started delivering thick packets beforehand containing prepared jokes, suggested questioning strategies, and even preferred camera angles. Carson, whose brilliance emerged from improvised responses, told his producer, "I won't conduct infomercials disguised as interviews." He's not performing television. He's reciting commercials. Though NBC initially objected, Carson threatened to leave if forced to endure more scripted discussions. Hope never received official notification, just gradually fewer booking opportunities that extended indefinitely. The Myrtle Young heart attack scare. Sometimes the most innocent moments turned into absolute nightmares. In 1987, Myrtle Young, a sweet elderly woman from Indiana, appeared on the show to display her collection of potato chips that resembled famous figures. What followed was the prank that haunted Carson for years. Myrtle had arranged her precious chips in 2 tins, proudly showing one shaped like Abraham Lincoln. Carson seemed genuinely delighted by this wholesome, quirky segment. But then his mischievous side took over. While Myrtle turned to retrieve another chip, Johnny reached below his desk, pulled out a regular potato chip, and took a loud, crunching bite. Myrtle spun around in horror, clutching her chest. She genuinely believed Carson had eaten one of her prized collectibles. The audience roared with laughter until they realized Myrtle wasn't acting. She was in genuine distress. Her face went pale as she struggled to remain standing. Carson's grin vanished instantly. He dropped the chip and grabbed her arm, quickly explaining it was just a regular chip, not one of her treasures. "I wouldn't eat your chips, Myrtle." "I wouldn't do that," he assured her, genuine concern replacing his prankster smile. During the commercial break, paramedics rushed onto the set. Carson spent the entire break apologizing profusely, offering to replace her entire collection, repeatedly asking if she needed medical attention. According to Henry Bushkin, Carson's longtime lawyer, Johnny later expressed deep regret about this moment, calling it a mean-spirited thing to do to a sweet lady. For weeks afterward, Carson would replay the footage in his dressing room, wincing every time he saw Myrtle's reaction. When NBC requested the clip for a blooper reel, Johnny personally refused. The incident bothered Carson for years, and he occasionally referenced it as an example of a joke he wished he could take back, a rare admission for a host who rarely acknowledged missteps. The Joan Rivers betrayal. In 1986, Johnny Carson experienced what he considered the ultimate betrayal from someone he had personally mentored. For years, Joan Rivers had been Carson's permanent guest host on The Tonight Show, a position of tremendous honor that Carson had given to very few people during his tenure. When Rivers secretly negotiated a deal with the fledgling Fox network to host her own competing late-night show, Carson found out through industry gossip rather than from Rivers herself. The night before the announcement, Rivers had appeared on The Tonight Show, warmly bantering with Carson while wearing the same dress she'd worn during her first appearance years earlier, never mentioning her imminent departure. When Carson discovered the truth, he was livid. He immediately banned Rivers from NBC entirely, refusing to ever speak to her again, despite her multiple attempts to reconcile. The ban was so absolute that even subsequent Tonight Show hosts maintained it out of loyalty to Carson, with Rivers not appearing on the show again until 2014, nearly a decade after Carson's death. What made this moment so painful for Carson was his deeply held value of loyalty. As a notoriously private person with few close professional relationships, Carson had viewed Rivers as part of his inner circle. Her decision to compete against him without warning triggered his infamous cold shoulder, a punishment from which he never relented for the remaining 19 years of his life. According to close associates, Carson told NBC executives, "Joan who?" whenever her name was mentioned afterward. Rivers tried for years to apologize, sending letters, Christmas baskets, and even a painting of his beloved Nebraska farmhouse. Every gift came back marked "Return to Sender." Rivers later admitted in interviews that losing Carson's friendship was the greatest regret of her career, saying, "Johnny was my mentor. Without him, there would be no me." The incident became Hollywood legend, a cautionary tale about loyalty, ambition, and the consequences of betrayal. The Chevy Chase disaster. Chevy Chase's 1986 appearance to promote Three Amigos quickly devolved into one of the most uncomfortable interviews of Carson's career. From the moment he sat down, Chase projected an air of superiority, speaking over Carson and hijacking the interview completely. Rather than engaging with Carson, Chase began directing his answers toward the audience, a major breach of talk show etiquette. He interrupted Johnny repeatedly, mocked his tie, and demanded bigger applause from the audience. This wasn't just rude, it was a professional assault on Carson's authority. Those familiar with Carson's subtle tells could see the signs of his growing irritation, the tightened jaw, the forced smile, and most tellingly, the rhythmic drumming of his pencil on the desk. When the pencil tapping accelerated to machine gun speed, insiders knew Johnny was seething underneath his professional veneer. The breaking point came when Chase slapped Carson's shoulder hard, a physical boundary crossing that the host did not appreciate. The studio went dead silent as Johnny's voice turned ice cold. "Touch me again, and you'll be hosting alone." The audience laughed nervously, thinking it was part of the bit. It wasn't. Backstage after the segment, Carson skipped his usual polite thank you. Instead, he asked his talent coordinator, did he rehearse being in Jerk, or does that come naturally? When the producer suggested booking Chase again in a few months, Carson replied, book him on any show that doesn't tape here. For years, literally decades, Chase's name was nowhere to be found on the Tonight Show guest list. When reporters asked Johnny years later why Chase never returned, he paused and said, I like guests who share the ball, not steal it. The message was clear. Suggest you could replace Johnny Carson, and you'd be replaced yourself. The Black Panther lunge. In 1975, animal trainer Ron Shannon brought a supposedly tame Black Panther onto The Tonight Show. Carson, attempting to appear brave, approached the big cat's cage during a commercial break to get a closer look. What happened next became one of the most replayed bloopers in television history. Without warning, the panther lunged at the cage bars, swiping at Carson's face with its paw. Though the cage protected him, Carson was so startled that he visibly jumped backward and fell onto the studio floor. The audience howled with laughter as a shaken Carson returned to his desk, attempting to play off his genuine fear. I just lost 9 lives, he quipped, turning disaster into comedy. But behind the recovery joke, viewers could see his hands trembling as he shuffled his cards. This wasn't nervous energy. This was genuine shock. The man who'd survived 3 decades of live television had just come face to face with his own mortality. What made this moment particularly uncomfortable for Carson was that the show's director caught his fall on camera, and the clip was replayed endlessly on blooper reels, much to Carson's embarrassment. According to Carson's longtime producer, Fred de Cordova, Johnny was particularly bothered about this incident becoming part of blooper specials because it contradicted his carefully maintained image of cool composure. The incident led to what became known as the Carson Rule. No large predator within 3 feet of the desk. They actually measured and taped the distance on the studio floor. Months later, when a rival talk show aired the clip again, Carson called NBC legal in a rare fury. Next time I'll feed their host to a cat. NBC, being NBC, thought the whole thing was ratings gold and continued using the clip in promotions despite Carson's objections. Each time it showed up, he'd fire off another memo. Get fresh tape. Retire that clip. It became a running battle between Carson and the network's promotion department that lasted for years. The Wayne Newton confrontation. In 1981, Wayne Newton appeared on The Tonight Show with one mission: confronting Carson about jokes targeting his high-pitched voice and effeminate mannerisms. Rather than promoting his latest project, Newton immediately went on the offensive, creating one of the most tension-filled segments in the show's history. I don't appreciate being made fun of, Newton said through a tight smile. I've been a gentleman long enough. The audience fell silent as Newton leaned forward, his normally friendly demeanor replaced with barely concealed anger. Carson, caught completely off guard, attempted to defuse the situation with humor. But Newton wasn't having it. What viewers at home didn't see was the even more heated exchange during commercial breaks. According to Peter Lasley, Newton made statements that Carson perceived as veiled threats. The backstage crew described the tension as thick enough to cut with a knife, as both men maintained forced smiles for the cameras while glaring daggers off air. What Carson found intolerable about this incident was being confronted about his comedy on his own show, especially in front of a live audience. The confrontation violated Carson's cardinal rule: never air personal grievances on camera. After this incident, Newton was reportedly on Carson's do not book list for years. The situation was particularly tense because Newton wasn't just angry about jokes, he was dealing with serious personal threats. Unknown to viewers, Newton had been receiving legitimate threats from organized crime figures in Las Vegas, and the stress of fearing for his family's safety had pushed him to a breaking point. As Carson explained to his head writer, Raymond Siller, after the show, "You can say anything you want about me off camera, but on my stage, I'm in control." This encounter represented one of the rare times when Carson's carefully maintained composure nearly cracked on air, revealing the steel beneath his genial host persona. The toilet paper panic. In December 1973, Carson made a joke in his monologue that accidentally triggered a nationwide shortage of an essential product. "You know, we've got all sorts of shortages these days," he said. "But have you heard the latest? I'm not kidding. I saw it in the papers. There's an acute shortage of toilet paper. What Carson didn't anticipate was that viewers would take his joke seriously. The next day, panicked consumers began clearing store shelves of toilet paper, creating an actual shortage that lasted for weeks. The Tonight Show had inadvertently caused a nationwide panic over a non-existent problem. Carson was mortified by the real-world impact of his joke. When he returned to the air, he issued a clarification and rare on-air apology. "I don't want to be remembered as the man who created a false toilet paper scare. There is no shortage except for the one I caused." What Carson hated about this incident was the unintended consequences of his comedy. He prided himself on understanding the power of television, but had underestimated just how much influence his words carried with the American public. The toilet paper joke became a textbook case of media-induced panic studied in journalism schools nationwide. The Federal Trade Commission and several members of Congress actually contacted NBC about the incident, concerned about Carson's ability to affect national commerce with a single joke. Carson was stunned by the reaction, telling his producer, "All I did was make a joke about toilet paper. If I'd known people would react this way, I'd have made a joke about world peace instead." For years afterward, Carson would occasionally reference the incident when making jokes about shortages, always adding, "And this time, I'm not joking." The toilet paper panic demonstrated the incredible trust Americans placed in Carson. They believed him even when he was clearly joking, a level of credibility few television personalities have ever achieved. The Yuri Geller debunking in 1973, self-proclaimed psychic Yuri Geller appeared on The Tonight Show, promising to demonstrate his supernatural abilities. What Geller didn't know was that Carson, a skilled amateur magician himself, had consulted with professional magician and skeptic James Randi before the show to set up an elaborate trap. On Randy's advice, Carson's team prepared their own props for Geller's demonstrations, rather than allowing him to use his own specially prepared items. When presented with these unfamiliar props, Geller faltered completely. Despite multiple attempts, Geller failed to bend spoons, identify hidden drawings, or make a compass move, all feats he had successfully performed on other shows. As Geller made increasingly desperate excuses, Carson's skepticism became more apparent. "We'll give you as much time as you need. In the next life," Carson quipped as the audience erupted in laughter. Geller's face turned crimson with embarrassment as his psychic powers mysteriously failed him on national television. What made this moment particularly significant was that Carson had deliberately set up Geller to fail. Carson deeply resented charlatans who claimed supernatural powers, and this was his calculated attempt to expose what he viewed as a fraud. The result was tremendously uncomfortable television as Geller squirmed, making excuses about not feeling strong today. The irony of this incident was its unexpected aftermath. Despite his humiliation on The Tonight Show, Geller's career paradoxically flourished. The public interpreted his failure as proof of authenticity. After all, if he were merely performing tricks, they would work every time. This outcome deeply frustrated Carson, who had hoped to end Geller's career as a psychic, but instead had inadvertently enhanced it. Carson later implemented a new policy. Any paranormal demonstration must use props supplied by The Tonight Show. Magicians loved it. So-called psychics avoided the studio for years. Decades later, documentaries still replay the meltdown as the Night Network TV challenged the supernatural. The Don Rickles box incident. In 1976, during one of comedian Don Rickles' appearances on The Tonight Show, Rickles accidentally broke Carson's prized cigarette box, a personal item that sat on Carson's desk throughout his career. While demonstrating an anecdote, Rickles knocked over the wooden box, breaking its lid. Carson's reaction was immediate. His face tightened, and longtime viewers could see genuine irritation flash across his typically composed demeanor. Though Carson quickly recovered with humor, staffers later revealed that the host was genuinely upset backstage. The following night, Carson turned his annoyance into comedy gold. He marched on to the adjacent CPO Sharkey set where Rickles was filming his sitcom, cameras in tow, barking, "You broke my box!" The audience loved the crossover moment, and it appeared as though Carson had taken the incident in stride. What viewers didn't realize was that the cigarette box was more than just a prop. It was a treasured gift from a stagehand who had once saved Carson from a studio fire. Tonight Show producer Fred de Cordova later revealed, Johnny valued it tremendously, and though he played it off on air, he was genuinely bothered by Rickles breaking it. The incident illustrates how Carson kept clear boundaries between his personal and public life and how uncomfortable he became when those lines were crossed. As comedy writer David Steinberg later noted, Johnny could roll with almost any joke at his expense, but touch his stuff without permission, and you'd see a flash of the real man behind the host mask. This wasn't Rickles' only transgression. Over the years, he ignored timing lights, derailed segments, demolished props, and pushed jokes the censors had rejected. The broken box became shorthand for a larger pattern of chaos. Though Rickles remained a frequent guest due to his undeniable comedy genius, Carson implemented stricter rules about handling personal items on set after this incident. The Milton Berle takeover television pioneer, Milton Berle, known as Uncle Milty to generations of viewers, appeared on The Tonight Show in 1965 and delivered a masterclass in how not to be a talk show guest. Berle, a product of vaudeville and early television, where performers fought for every second of camera time, essentially hijacked the show from the moment he walked on stage. He interrupted Carson repeatedly, told long-winded stories without allowing Johnny to interject, and even started directing the band and cameras himself. At one point, Berle actually stood up and began working the audience directly, turning The Tonight Show into his personal variety hour, while Carson sat helplessly at his desk. For Carson, who prided himself on maintaining control of his program, Berle's domineering behavior was insufferable. Though he maintained his composure on air, backstage Carson exploded, telling his producer never to book Berle without explicit instructions about respecting the show's format. The most uncomfortable moment came when Berle began critiquing Carson's interviewing technique on air. Johnny, you're asking the wrong questions. Here's what you should be asking me." Carson's smile remained fixed, but his eyes conveyed a message that veteran staffers recognized immediately. Uncle Milty had crossed the line. This incident contributed to Carson's notorious gatekeeping, of which comedians would be invited to sit on the couch after their performances, a coveted honor that he would withhold from performers who didn't respect his boundaries. Berle's bookings became increasingly rare, and when he did appear, producers would brief him extensively about staying within his role as a guest. The Berle incident became a cautionary tale told to new Tonight Show guests for decades. You might be a legend, but on The Tonight Show, there was only one star, and his name was Johnny Carson. As Johnny later told his producer, "I don't care if he invented television. On my show, I'm the host, not the hostage." The Farah Fawcett meltdown. In June 1980, Charlie's Angels star Farah Fawcett appeared on The Tonight Show in what would become one of the most uncomfortable interviews of Carson's career. From the moment she sat down, Fawcett seemed disoriented, struggling to complete thoughts and rambling through disconnected stories. Wearing a silver jumpsuit with her iconic feathered hair, Fawcett began answering questions about her new film, Saturn III, by calling it Saturday 3, and then launching into a rambling story about roller skating in Malibu. Carson's smile tightened as his pencil tapped faster on the desk, a telltale sign of his growing frustration. As the interview progressed, Fawcett's behavior became increasingly erratic. She leaned forward and whispered, "Sometimes I dream I'm a dolphin," to which Carson replied with forced patience, "And do you wake up wet?" The audience's nervous laughter couldn't disguise the train wreck unfolding on screen. During a commercial break, Carson hissed to producer Fred de Cordova, "Help me." De Cordova suggested cutting the segment short, but NBC's control room refused, seeing the uncomfortable spectacle as ratings gold. Carson sighed, straightened his tie, and faced the cameras again, desperately trying to salvage the interview. Fawcett picked invisible lint from Carson's lapel, interrupted herself mid-sentence, and openly admired the boom microphone. "It's like a huge lollipop." Carson finally wrapped it quickly. "Farah Fawcett, folks." The movie opens Friday. Wear your seatbelts. It was as close to a public rescue as Carson ever performed. The press speculated wildly about Fawcett's condition that night, with theories ranging from medication interactions to exhaustion from red-eye flights and endless press junkets. Carson publicly wished her well, but privately instituted the Farah Protocol, mandatory rest requirements, rehearsals, and a ban on energy drinks before airtime. Late-night hosts still cite Fawcett's visit as a masterclass in how not to do television. For Carson, it represented Exhibit A of how a single guest could turn his controlled kingdom into complete chaos. The Ed McMahon shark debate. Perhaps the most shocking argument in Tonight Show history involved Carson's most trusted colleague and closest friend, Ed McMahon. What made this confrontation particularly heartbreaking was that it occurred during a period when Carson was still grieving a family tragedy, and his emotional walls were higher than ever. In 1983, a seemingly innocent discussion about marine life escalated into a genuine confrontation that shocked both the studio audience and home viewers. During Carson's monologue, he made a joke about beach safety and shark attacks. McMahon, perhaps emboldened by a few pre-show drinks, interrupted with a correction that caught Carson completely off. Well, does the shark continually swim? It never stops swimming. The shark never stops swimming, McMahon insisted, derailing Carson's prepared joke. Visibly irritated, Carson tried to move on, but McMahon continued, "All its life." Carson's patience snapped. "What has that got to do with my joke?" he demanded. "You say for the first 3 years?" "This is all its life. It never stops swimming." McMahon, clearly stung, fired back with unexpected force. "And my job for 30 years has been to make you look good, Johnny. Sometimes that means speaking up when you're about to make yourself look foolish." The statement hung in the air like a live wire as the audience fell silent. During the commercial break, the two men had a whispered but heated exchange that crew members described as the most intense moment they'd ever witnessed between the longtime partners. When they returned from the commercial, both men were professional but noticeably cooler toward each other. The easy chemistry that had defined their partnership for decades was strained for weeks afterward. What viewers didn't know was that McMahon's unusual assertiveness that night may have been fueled by his own personal struggles. He was quietly battling financial problems and drinking issues that he kept hidden from Johnny, creating tension in their relationship that neither man acknowledged publicly. Though they eventually reconciled, this rare crack in television's most famous friendship revealed how even the strongest partnerships could be tested by the pressures of maintaining America's most watched late-night program for decades on end. These 16 insane moments reveal something important about Johnny Carson that his polished nightly performances often concealed. Behind the charming host was a deeply private man who valued control, professionalism, and maintaining clear boundaries. When those boundaries were crossed, we caught rare glimpses of the real man behind the television icon. Which of these shocked you the most? Was it the animal disasters, the celebrity meltdowns, or the betrayals that cut deepest? Drop a comment below with your favorite Carson memory. And let me know if you think today's talk show hosts would handle these disasters with the same legendary composure, or if Johnny Carson truly was the last of a dying breed of television professionals who put dignity above viral moments.